Good evening and welcome to the 2017 First Selectmen's debate hosted by the Morgan Political Club. My name is Wyatt Rue, this is Sarah Aletta, and this is Ella Franzoni.
This evening, both the Republican and Democratic candidates for First Selectman will be afforded the opportunity to discuss and debate some of the most pivotal issues of concern to Clinton residents.
As a gesture of goodwill to the community and a valuable educational experience for our students, the Morgan Political Club continues to sponsor and conduct local and state political debates, proving over the last 12 years that students, if provided high levels of responsibility, can and often do perform to high expectations in a public setting. While you are here to listen to these candidates, you will also witness Clinton students participating in the political process. It is stated in one of our school's expectations, students will demonstrate civic and global responsibility. We are taking that responsibility seriously and showing it to our community this evening.
Very few high schools in Connecticut offer this type of service to their community, and we will continue to pride ourselves on fairness, objectivity, and civility. We hope you enjoy what we expect to be an open dialogue between our endorsed candidates. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will now begin with a 3-minute opening statement for each candidate, decided previously with the flip of a coin. Candidates will both be given a 3-minute response. Candidates in general will be given a 3-minute response time for each question and a 1-minute rebuttal. Questions will be asked on a rotating basis. Each candidate will be given a 3-minute closing statement in the opposite order that the openings were given. Both endorsed and write-in candidates will be available in the lobby following the debate to answer questions and to discuss. We will now begin with opening statements, starting with Christine.
Thank you to the Morgan Political Club and Eric Bergman for organizing this event, as well as Kirk Carr, and everybody in the audience who's come out on the wet, blustery evening. Sorry. Hear me now? Yes. All right. We need to address structural deficits, fund pensions, healthcare obligations, reinvest in our infrastructure, and provide municipal services our businesses and our residents expect and deserve. We need to understand and utilize strategies available to face these challenges. How are we going to do this? The only way we can do is through the leadership and project management. We need to deal with the low-hanging fruit and long-term strategies of projects. There's things such as working with the Energy Committee and department heads to reduce our energy costs, find solutions for energy savings for municipal buildings, businesses and residents, improve signage into the community, directing people to resources such as the marinas in the downtown. There's facade grants available for businesses along Route 1, small-scale improvements that our downtown can make it more successful. Building public and private partnerships is important. There's a PPP legislation, which is a public-private partnership legislation through the Office of Policy Management, Department of Economic and Community Development, and through DOT, and they've created advisory teams with financial and legal technical expertise to help communities succeed. We need to look at our startups and at-home businesses. We have quite a few. Get the information flowing between government and businesses to help them find ways to grow through creating tax incentive structures, asset deferral programs. We need to also look at the process with EDC, and I've already started working with them on a number of fronts, engaging with them, with the development office, with Clinton Crossing assignments, to look at the Morgan site, to find out which developers might be interested in that site. Also working with EDC on the First Impressions program, which provides us with information on how we look and feel to first-time visitors. It can be used to identify improvements that are attractive to shoppers, tourists, business travelers, and potential employers. We need to support taxpayers and fixed incomes, and we need communication. We need to inform the public with social media to create transparency, improve morale, and cost saving with less duplication. We need to market our town and create marketing plan using social media tools. We need to work with EDC, the Resource for Historic Preservation, Connecticut Economic Community Development, our regional planning agencies, and the Chamber to come up with strategies to market Clinton's resources as the jewel of the shoreline between New York and Boston. This budget could leave us in uncharted territory, both for Clinton and Connecticut. But we have a positive outcome with representation on a local level fighting for us, for Clinton, for a comprehensive effort of short-term and long-term strategies, and the right leadership can get us there.
Thank you, Mrs. Goupil. Mr. Carr?
Thank you very much. I would like to express my special thanks to Chris Zalotsky and to Eric Bergman, who are the faculty advisors for these young people, certainly our panelists, Sarah Letta, Ella Franzotti, and Wyatt Rue, and also the Morgan Principal, Carrie Hagnes, and the Superintendent of Schools, Marianne O'Donnell, for hosting this, and a very special thank you to all of you who are here this evening on this very rainy evening. It's a real tribute to your interest in our community that you've come out tonight. Republican and Democrat voters were unambiguous in their decision in the primary on September 12th. They clearly voted to end the status quo. Having talked to many unaffiliated voters over the last 2 months, it is clear that this is a time for significant change in course. This is a rare wake-up moment that must not be squandered. And here are just a few of the facts. On my far right, your left, Clinton's mill rate jumped 10.2%. By far the biggest jump among our shoreline neighbors. That jump makes ours the highest mill rate on the shoreline by a distant margin. If the budget stalemate in Hartford is not resolved, Clinton taxpayers could get another nasty surprise of an additional 7.4% special assessment over the holidays. The increase in taxes since 2010 has far outstripped population, which is the lower line, going up 28% in that period of time. These divergent trends of flat growth or no growth and continued increases in taxes are simply unsustainable. In Connecticut, property taxes fall on the lowest income households. As you can see, this is the graph from the Department of Revenue Services, and what it basically shows is the percentage of income by decile. And looking at the bottom three, you can see that these taxes fall heaviest on the people that can least afford it. My Democratic friends who would work very hard for these people will send them a 10.2% tax increase without the blink of an eye. To cover the state cuts with commercial development alone would require between 3 and 6 mill pond-sized developments of $50 million each, or between $150 and $300 million. I'm the only candidate who believes in cutting taxes, that cutting taxes is imperative, and that it can be done without reducing services or quality of education. Defeating budget at referendum is a poor substitute for electing leaders who reverse the trend of very destructive trends and increased spending and taxes. Henry Ford once said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. I not only think that I can, I think that we must.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. At this time, Sarah will begin with our first debate question.
This question goes first to Mr. Carr. For many Clinton residents, property taxes are a significant financial hardship, and in many ways, they disincentivize the potential home buyers from moving to our town. What is your plan to make Clinton more enticing to prospective buyers?
Well, I think you just gave my speech. The fact is that a 10.2% tax increase on top of many years of tax increases. I know many people have been upset that a lot of these referendums have been defeated, budgets have been defeated at referendum. Can you imagine what these charts would look like if we hadn't been defeating some of these budgets at referendum? We need elected officials who are imaginative about how to reduce spending, and by doing so in a way that does not impinge on services, does not impinge on education. It's really, the 4 R's: restructure, right size, renegotiate, and regionalize. And those 4 R's are the pillars for us to be able to reduce our spending and to reduce our reliance on property taxes that are killing families, killing seniors, and are disincentivizing businesses to move here. If we want our town to start growing again, we have to have a competitive tax rate. And you can see we don't have one, and we haven't had one. And I'm committed to make that change, to reverse these trends, so that our property values go up, our home values go up, and we start to see our mill rates start to decline.
Thank you. And Mrs. Goupil?
I absolutely believe that we need to focus on economic development to help support the community. We certainly have a large poverty rate in town, which I'm very concerned about, and seniors who are looking to downsize from their homes into something more affordable. By also looking at the senior property tax program, I think we have an opportunity to expand that for some of the seniors in town to help them stay in their homes should they want to. But at the end of the day, we need economic development. We need to reduce our taxes through focusing on those areas of town that need development. We have 7 specific focus areas that have been set out in the Town Plan and Conservation Development. The state has also deemed those as priority areas, and we need to get our leadership on board and also make sure the boards and commissions are lined up to execute rezoning of those areas for higher and better use to attract developers. But at the same time, we need to have people in town hall who are willing to engage with people at the state who are going to bring the programs to the town to help us develop those areas. We also need to look at the developers that are going to be interested in specific areas of the town that are where our existing infrastructure is. We need to invest in those areas of town because we can't continue to invest in other areas of the town without infrastructure. That would also help us reduce costs.
Thank you, Ms. Goupil. And the first rebuttal will go to Mr. Carr.
There is not enough opportunity in commercial development in Clinton to make up the $6 million that we just had or up $3 million, maybe $6 million in tax cuts, or tax in state funding, state aid. It would take 6 mill ponds to make up that difference. We have to do something about the cost side of the equation. I agree 100% we need economic development. I'm willing, in fact, I promised that I would give up half of my salary and start funding the Economic Development Commission. But the other thing I would do is I would be attending Economic Development Commission meetings, and by so doing, empowering them with the authority of the First Selectman to get the job done, to target those businesses and those kinds of businesses that complement the businesses that are already here and provide a diversity of services for our residents, and at the same time provide jobs and improve the tax base.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. And now for Mrs. Goupil's rebuttal.
I believe the other way we're going to be able to do that also is we certainly have to look at our budgets within the town and working with all the different department heads. We need to bring everybody together and to look at the structure of the town and see where we can do some shared services. I'd like to form a shared services committee to address that, and that would require every department head to sit on that or have a liaison sitting on that board to address specific items in the town. I certainly know that some of the departments are already looking to shared services. The police department is looking for cost-saving measures with the surrounding towns.
Thank you. For our next question in regards to education, we are in the midst of what might conceivably be unprecedented cuts to our ECS grant totals. And if Governor Malloy's executive order holds, we could lose up to $6 million in education funding. Our question is, what contingency plans would you have in place, and how might you replace these funds without affecting the high quality of education here in Clinton? And this question goes to Ms. Goupil.
Well, first and foremost, I think that the public education, our Board of Ed, and the Clinton Public Schools are the facilitators and the custodians of our children, and they set their investment path. We need to continue to invest and support our teacher retention to get the return of those future economic benefits as human capital. But addressing the issue specifically of budgets moving forward, the Board of Education works very hard to look at what sort of changes can be made within the departments, looking at the continually changing demographics of the town, but also the continually changing population structure of the town. I believe they've been very successful at finding many different areas to do cost-saving measures, and we're going to have to work together with them to continue to find those cost-saving measures moving forward. Everybody is very well aware of the CECs, the current issues with the budgets of the town, implications with the state. We are looking at $6 million. In the latest estimates, we're looking at a cut of $3 million. So they've halved it, but at the end of the day, that could be problematic. I do know the Board of Finance has been working closely with the Board of Ed to make sure that there is not a significant impacts to the student population and the services that they are provided.
Thank you, Mrs. Goupil. Mr. Carr?
Well, we have a man-made crisis on our hand. At the stroke of a pen, Democratic governor who came into office, pro-education, has slashed education support across the state. He did this, he said, so he wouldn't raise taxes. But in fact, what that has done is increased property taxes, the second most regressive tax that Connecticut taxpayers pay. Ms. Goupil said that there was work being done between the Board of Finance and the Board of Education. I'm on the Board of Finance. We've asked the Board of Education almost annually to consolidate things like the financial director and the business manager, things that don't impact education. And we've been resoundingly rejected on a number of those. This is a crisis that is a legitimate reason for us to renegotiate, to restructure, to right-size, to do things that we didn't have to do before because we could do business as usual. But we can't do business as usual anymore. I've reached out to the superintendent of schools to have these discussions because I think they're really critical and I think they're urgent. And I hope that after the election that we'll have a chance to sit down and brainstorm this. I think sending poor people another 10.2% or another 7.4% tax increase or hitting our undesignated fund, we're already on the Moody's watch list of negative outlook. And we can't keep doing what we've been doing, so we have to do something that's seriously different. It's going to be hard-nosed, but it's going to be fair, it's going to be equitable. Everybody has to make a contribution. There can be no sacred cows, we can't show favoritism, and everybody has to do their part to pull together. And it's got to be in that spirit of togetherness that we can achieve for Clinton what a lot of people don't think can be done. I know the current First Selectman says that it's unrealistic to promise lowering taxes. Our taxes are so high now that there is opportunity, and I think we can find it. But it takes a crisis sometimes to make those things happen, and we've got a crisis, and we shouldn't squander it.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mrs. Goupil, if you'd like a 1-minute rebuttal.
I believe that, as Mr. Carr had stated, that the Board of Education has been working with the Board of Finance, and all indications have pointed to the fact that this $3 million cut has been accommodated for, this cost share cut has been accommodated for, and therefore we're in a better position to deal with the next budget round coming forward. I don't see a 10% increase on the table coming from the Board of Education at this point, and I'm sure that they're going to do their due diligence working with the First Selectman's office. The Board of Education is going to work with the current structure, whatever the outcome of a charter reform it would be as well, to make sure that they are providing the best for the town, but also being fiscally responsible.
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
Well, the decline in enrollment over the last 14 years has been 17%, and is projected to be 17% over the next 7 years. We've continued to increase the cost of education, and as a result, the cost per pupil has skyrocketed. It's up 32% since 2010. If we continue increasing the education budget just 2% a year, by 2024, it'll be almost $25,000 a year per pupil. There is no evidence that cost per pupil and performance correlate with one another. And so we've got to find some ways to do a better job of educating our students more cost effectively. One thing that is not that the Board of Education mission statement is anything about cost effectiveness. We've got to make, and I know they work hard, but it's not part of the mission statement. We've got to make cost effectiveness paramount to the education system.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. And now, the third question will go to Mr. Carr again. This question is pertaining specifically to industrial development. As we speak, many unsightly properties in town remain undeveloped. Seeking investors, these properties not only affect the general aesthetics of our community, but their development would sure increase our grand list. How would you propose to attract and secure investment in these sites, and how do you envision their use?
Well, there are a number of sites in Clinton that have, for a variety of reasons, have been previously industrial, and those industries have left. We've had the collapse of the Unilever warehouse. Those are tremendous opportunities to build a grand list, and to do so in some ways that could be very attractive financially. What we've got to be very careful of is that as we do that, we do not impinge on the residential properties that abut those locations, that we have proper buffering. And it was really interesting. I was at the Unilever ad hoc committee the other night, and I was kind of surprised and relieved to hear that some people in town would actually entertain making the Unilever site an industrial site once again, where I think the move has been to make it mixed use and to make it more residential and make it more transit oriented. We've got to find some ways to make those things work together. One of the things I thought that the EDC could do is to do some pre-approvals. One of the problems that we have is that when somebody wants to do something, the cost of getting it through planning and zoning can sometimes be prohibitive, and they don't know whether at the end of that process they're going to have a solution. So I think the EDC could begin to do some pre-approvals of certain kinds of usages, so that we can begin to tell people a lot of that work has been done with planning and zoning, so that when they come into town, it won't necessarily be turnkey, but it'll be a lot closer to turnkey to attract those kinds of developers, those kinds of industries.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mrs. Goupil?
First and foremost, I think we need to start creating marketing materials for those specific sites around town. These marketing materials could be shared through EDC and through our CERC organization, which is the Connecticut Economic Resource Center. They have a listserv there that can provide people with the information about specific towns that have development opportunities. When you create the marketing material, you could highlight specifically what the uses are, what kind of streamlined processes could be created through Planning and Zoning Commission outside the regulatory issues that are required, and also what DEEP is, Department of Environmental Protection, would allow on those sites. We need to start also working with DEEP. We were just up at DEEP this morning to address some of the issues with Unilever and possibly move forward more quickly with them, finding out what their process would be to make sure that developer can come in easily without having to get caught up with a longer term application process. I believe that all the industrial sites around town are problematic in that the residential has encroached upon them, but that doesn't mean the residential property owners should suffer for it. We need to address those areas and possibly rezone some of those areas as potentially residential if those property owners feel it's appropriate. They have pre-existing timelines there that allow them to be there, but we also need to expand industrial in town along with business, because that is what's going to support a tax base.
Thank you. And now to Mr. Carr for the first rebuttal.
Well, one of the things that we certainly could and should do is we now spend $48,000 a year on a planner consultant. One of the things that we ought to consider doing is repositioning that position as a marketing position, working more closely with the Economic Development Commission. And we've done a lot of planning. My friend John Allen likes to say enough monkey see, it's time for monkey do. And we need to get really in place some very aggressive marketing materials. I think CERC is a great resource. We certainly have underutilized CERC, and many industries, many companies start with CERC because they really do have a great inventory of locations and tremendous analysis of what is within the trading area of each of those locations.
Thank you. And Mrs. Goupil for a rebuttal?
Regarding the economic component of it, I believe a town planner is in order at this point. If you look at all the surrounding towns, at every conference I've been to, your planner is at the table, engaging with everybody at the state level. They're engaging with developers at seminars. There is an economic component to a planner, and that is necessary, but at the end of the day, we need to streamline our land use office to make it more efficient. We need to handhold developers so when they come to the land use office, they know that they're going to get everything they need in one office, that they don't have to go to different resources around the town and within the state. So a planner is really the linchpin there, and also to update our zoning regulations because we're antiquated at this point. We're not attractive to developers. And the only way we're going to do that is with a full-time planner who knows our town and knows the processes and the issues that are out there with the commission's structures at the current time.
Thank you, Mrs. Goupil. In tune with industrial development, downtown development is also a pertinent issue. Driving along the streets of other shoreline communities such as Old Saybrook, Madison, Guilford, it's difficult not to feel frustrated with the state of Clinton's downtown area. What ideas do you have to bring a competitive sense of vibrancy to our downtown area? And this question will go to Mrs. Goupil.
So a long time ago, we started an organization called Placemakers. I've since stepped away from it, but that was the first step to creating the dynamics in the downtown that needs to take place. Again, we need to market the downtown. We need to have directional signage when you come off each of the gateways into the community, directing people to downtown. But you also have to have some sort of vibrancy in the downtown to attract people. And that takes a relationship with the state, again, to look at some of these sites and see what is feasible for wastewater on the site so that people can expand to a higher and better use. So if our zoning aligns with expanding to a higher and better use, that makes sure that we need to know that the soils are developable. And for this reason that we applied for a grant, it was just in this last year for wastewater capacity at Unilever with potential into the downtown. That really is the only way that we're going to be able to develop these sites much further and much more expansively and have the vibrancy that we're interested in.
Thank you, Mrs. Goupil. Mr. Carr?
I've heard the issue of wastewater for some time. But a lot of these empty storefronts were once not empty, and we're quite in compliance with wastewater issues. I think that our problem is we've made it too hard to keep a small business running in Clinton through regulation and taxes, especially taxes. I know I keep coming back to the same thing, but it is the keystone of an awful lot of things in this town. And if we can't get a handle on the taxes, I mean, if you were deciding where you were going to start your business and you saw that chart, would you bring it to Clinton or would you put it in Westbrook or would you put it in Old Saybrook? So I mean, some of these things are pretty obvious, and we're not at a competitive advantage. We're certainly, and we may be at a competitive disadvantage. We've got to find ways to make what we have seem more valuable so we can justify those mill rates, or we have to bring them down. The other part about these empty storefronts is not only are they not producing tax revenue, but they're not providing jobs and they're not providing the convenience. Many of us have to go to other towns to get things we used to get here. I was trying to find a cobbler the other day. I have to go to Brantford to find somebody to work on shoes. There used to be a cobbler that was, down on Main Street. I don't know why these things go away, but the fact is that keeping a small business going in Clinton has gotten to be very difficult, and we have to be mindful of that. I mean, one of the things that the EDC did was we started inviting people into Clinton who go to Clinton Crossing. 4 million people in Clinton Crossing, and the basic blocking and tackling of inviting them to come and visit our restaurants and see all of our events was not being done until 3 years ago when the EDC created the restaurant guide. And we now have standees at Clinton Crossing, and we're going to have posters up for Christmas in Clinton, so that there are things that we can do to take advantage of the resources that we have. We've got a beautiful harbor. One side of that standee showed people that just 5 minutes away there's this beautiful harbor. So we've got to draw people into Clinton, not only from Clinton Crossing, but also from the Hammonasset State Park. There are 1.5 million people who go to Hammonasset State Park every year. We've got to figure out ways to make those people come in. But the problem is it's chicken and egg. We also need the kinds of businesses that they need to come in to go to.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mrs. Goupil, if you'd like a rebuttal.
I agree that we absolutely need to be attracting people from the surrounding communities. We can't completely rely on our current businesses to support the community. So we do have the outlook of looking at Clinton and then the regional areas and what's going to be attractive. So we have a marketing feasibility study for the town that has not been implemented yet, and that is the first go-to. You've got to look at your data and what is marketable for the town and what are developers looking at, and then rezone for those areas as well. Then you have to go out and find these developers. You need to create tax structures that make it attractive to the developers coming in. We have the opportunity to create the assessment deferral programs, which is on a sliding scale where people can come in and they can expand, and then they can gradually start off with lower taxes, and gradually it goes to the standard tax that they have, but it gives them an opportunity to build their business and accommodate to the typical tax structure of the town.
Mr. Carr?
You know, the tax program that she just spoke about is a great idea as long as it doesn't give an advantage to a newcomer over a business that's been here. The key is to try to find businesses that complement businesses that are already here. By that I mean, we don't try to get another pizza parlor. We have plenty of pizza parlors. But we do need a cobbler. And there's some other things that, that we would like to have that would make Clinton more livable. There's just services that people, have to go to North Branford or to Guilford or someplace else, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to attract and support and sustain those kinds of businesses on Main Street in Clinton, to make Main Street in Clinton a viable, thriving downtown that's as good as any on the shoreline, better.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. The next question will be directed to Mr. Carr. Are you in favor of the current ballot question adopting the town manager form of local governance? If this change is adopted by the local electorate this November 7th, what effect would it have on your plans for governing Clinton, Connecticut as its first selectman?
Well, I think the first question is the people of Clinton want a town manager. Whether I want a town manager or not, or whether some of my colleagues want one or not, is probably not nearly as important as whether you want one or not. I see a lot of advantages to a town manager. I see an expense, but I think the advantages far outweigh the expenses. I mean, every week that goes by is $20,000 of opportunity costs of taxes that we should be getting from Mill Pond. A town manager who could have made that happen, who could have salvaged that development, would have paid for himself or herself in about 8 weeks, for 1 year. I mean, it's really critical that we have some professional town management. But that's my point of view. I think in the end, it's really up to you. The bigger problem are the flaws in this particular proposal, and even the coalition that I think has come out in favor of the town manager has said that these flaws render this particular ballot question very dangerous, and people probably should vote no on it. The problem I have is trying to learn something from that, trying to find out if people really are against the town manager or just against this proposal. And one of the things I'm proposing to do is to have an exit poll, so we can ask people if they voted, did they vote yes or no? If they voted no, did they vote no because they don't want a town manager, or did they vote no because the proposal is flawed? I hate to bring back the same proposal over and over again if people really don't want it. I mean, people get tired of going to the polls to vote on something that they thought they said no to. On the other hand, this has been so badly botched that I'm not sure what we're going to learn from the vote on November the 7th. I would encourage the people who are here tonight to probably vote no on the 7th, and we're going to have to regroup after this election and try to decide how we can salvage some of the proposals from this Charter Revision Commission.
Thank you. And now Mrs. Goupil.
Kirk Carr and I have both been on the same page on this. We've watched what's unfolded with the Board of Selectmen regarding the charter, and the implications are quite dire. If it is voted yes, it requires us to go from almost a 2-week window. It would be 30 days from the vote to 2 weeks when the Board of Selectmen, new Board of Selectmen walk in the door to implement both the town manager and town planner, and also get rid of the Board of Finance. How are we going to actually finance this town manager with that structure? How are we going to advertise, vet, interview, and find the appropriate candidate? Most of the towns who have gone through this process, it's about an 8-month process to find the appropriate candidate. I believe a town manager would bring the due diligence and the professionalism to town hall that's required. They would also help with the issue of partisanship in town. I think that's a real issue still, looking forward to the boards and commissions that we have on the ballot. I can see a lot of divides are still going to be created. How are we going to get past that within the next 2 years? Another issue I see with the charter currently as it is if we're going to get rid of a Board of Finance structure, is a Board of Selectmen 4 people enough to be doing the due diligence of what's required for budgeting for the year? I would strongly recommend that we reconstitute this revision committee, the Charter Revision Committee, immediately, but also look at whether a town council form of government makes sense that goes from something with 7 to 9 town council, so that you have more oversight, you have more professionalism at the table to address it. I also think that we need to look at putting within our charter some ethics. We currently have a very weak ethics rules, and it's outside the charter. This would give us the opportunity to have code of conducts for meetings, and it gives us some ability to actually deal with some of the issues that have been happening in town.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, would you like a rebuttal?
I think, we have talked at some length. I think we agree mostly on the issue of the town manager. I think the real sad thing is that I feel that the Board of Selectmen have really let us down through this process and have not been particularly helpful or very statesmanlike, and I really regret that.
Ms. Goupil, would you like to add anything?
The town of Clinton entered into a consent order in 1997 with the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. Previous studies in the town had identified areas that could not support on-site septic systems. Where are we currently with our water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, and where do you see potential development, and how do you devise we get there? And this question goes first to Ms. Goupil.
So that everybody understands that in 1997, when we signed that consent order, it was acknowledging that we created the issue of dense development in unsustainable areas of town, and that we created the community pollution problems. How are we going to pay for it? Well, it really is up to the Board of Selectmen to determine how that structure is created, not WPCC. There's a lot of misconception out there that WPCC is actually in charge of creating that financial structure. They are an advisory role to create advice to the Board of Selectmen. At the end of the day, the Board of Selectmen, working with the Board of Finance, has to determine that. But the town is responsible for resolving the community problems right now. We need to look at benefit assessments and see if we can defray some of the costs there. But what is the water company offering us? We still don't know that. We don't have an answer to that. Is that 2% loan still available if we're going to deal with some of these issues? And regarding the water pipe going up to Rocky Ledge, what's going to happen there? And why is there 3 years that the town is responsible for that process? That would incur the cost of hiring additional town employees to manage that. So these are questions that still need to be addressed. But we need to really look well beyond what these troubleshooting approaches are and look at scalable solutions to look at our future growth. And this goes back to the wastewater potential at Unilever for the downtown. What is the capacity there? What could we build upon to prioritize development in the downtown area? And look to the Route 1, what's available there soil-wise, and then really expand upon what we have in town. Restaurants, etc., really need those wastewater opportunities to be able to come into Clinton, and that was one of the things that most people were interested in through the town plan process, is more restaurant options.
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
Well, the Water Pollution Control Commission has had several studies, somewhat inconclusive. They've had numbers anywhere from 120 million to 50 million, which is, I think, the current operating number. And then there's the question, which is, I think, separate, although it's related, which Ms. Goupil raised, was this water main going up Route 81. Clearly, a private water main ought to be paid for by the water company. And I think the move to try to get Clinton to pay for that was really a misfire. There's no precedent for the town of Clinton to be paying for water mains. It really is something that the water company should be doing. But it sets a precedent for how we might pay for water pollution control and wastewater solutions. And I don't think we have first of all, I don't think we have enough studies to tell us exactly what that is, even though we've had tons of studies. I don't think we have a lot of specifics quite yet. But secondly, even if we did have an engineering solution, we have to have a financial solution and a political solution. And that financial solution has to recognize that 1,200 households in Clinton out of 6,100, that it's going to be very hard to convince us politically for the other 5,000 households to pay for the 1,200 households. And so it really gets to be, you have to think it through. I understand the benefit assessment, and according to Hal Dolan, he tells me that about the most that you could expect the homeowners to pay is about $20,000. When you back that up to figure out what you could support, that's a $32 million solution in which the state would pay 25%. The homeowners would pay up to whatever that benefit is, and that would leave nothing for the taxpayers under that kind of a scenario. But you need something that is politically acceptable to the voters of Clinton. And it's a three-legged stool, and I think we have one leg so far.
Thank you. Ms. Goupil, would you like a rebuttal?
So currently there's 5.1 million that has been brought forward to the Board of Finance for the water main pipe up to Rocky Ledge, and they're tabling it right now until we can determine some of those questions that need to be asked. But at the end of the day, if we do not find a solution that is politically acceptable at the ballot to resolve some of these issues, the state will come in and force a solution on us, similar to some of the surrounding towns. So when we have a new Board of Selectmen, we need to address this specifically, because it is something that is hanging over us. And we spent a lot of money within WPCC for reports specifically giving us options, but now we have to find the solutions that are going to work with those options, both financially and, as Mr. Carr said, that are politically acceptable.
Mr. Carr?
Well, the threat of Water Pollution Control Commission coming in, I mean, they're so understaffed these days that they couldn't even get the mill pond thing through. The state's cutting our funding at the same time they're demanding things of us, and they don't really have the manpower really to demand all that. At some point, I think we're surrendering when we could be probably fighting some of this a little bit harder. I clearly believe that the Board of Selectmen suggesting that the taxpayers of Clinton should pay for a water main up to Rocky Ledge was, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was just so shocked by it. And as a taxpayer, and as a resident, as a voter, I just couldn't have been more disappointed.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy inflicted some damage to the Connecticut shoreline, but it ravaged areas of the New Jersey and New York coastlines. What can we do in Clinton, Connecticut to reduce the adverse impact of extreme weather events, and particularly storms coming over Long Island Sound, with hurricane-force winds and possible inundation of areas of our town? And this question is first directed to Mr. Carr.
I think it's a really important question. Whether you believe in climate change or not, clearly the storm systems are hitting us in the United States, the East Coast of the United States, more frequently. We've certainly been ravaged a couple of times, and we still are owed about $800,000 from FEMA from these two hurricanes. But anything that any town does to fortify their coast, basically threatens their neighbors because the water has to go someplace. So we need a regional solution to this. And when I say regional, I don't mean just the coastline of Connecticut. This has to be New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and we've got to think about what we can do to suppress some of the tides that are in Long Island Sound. I mean, the Dutch have been doing this for 500 years. I mean, we ought to be able to learn something. I call it the Zuiderzee solution. Most people look at me like I'm crazy. I'm almost reluctant to tell you that that's something that I think that we should be thinking about. But if we could put up tide gates at both ends of Long Island Sound and at high tide when a storm is coming, putting up those gates, we could solve the problem for Long Island or Long Island Sound and for surrounds. Almost anything else is a bunch of Band-Aids, and all those Band-Aids are going to be very expensive. And they're going to cause, in any Band-Aid you put on your problem is going to cause a problem for your neighbor. So we have to think much bigger, and it's beyond Clinton, but I think we need to have a say in it, we need to be advocating for it, and I think we can benefit from it. If we don't, I mean, we have this big surge area in downtown Clinton that is a real threat to the livelihood of Clinton. If it really got washed out, it could be very hard to replace. We have a fire department that's in a floodplain. We have a number of these that are real threats to public safety, and they're urgent. I mean, I don't want to see us wait until we really have a disaster to address them, but they are big problems, and they're bigger problems than little Clinton by itself can resolve.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mrs. Goupil?
I believe there's some issues that we can resolve on the local level. Specifically, the fire department is in a floodplain. At the last inundation, they were about 3 minutes away from evacuating, from what I was told. So that is something that needs to be considered, whether that site is appropriate. We also have to look at the causeway. That needs to be elevated because that area is the egress for most of those residents down there in an emergency situation. These are things that came out of the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, which folds into a coastal resiliency plan. With coastal resiliency, there are mechanisms that we can do on the local level to address it with natural materials and creating buffers around Clinton that are natural through infrastructure with our coastal wetlands and expanding those areas. But at the end of the day, this is a issue that needs to be addressed at the state level, working with the River COG and other COGs around the state to find solutions. Because if one town, well, many of the towns actually surrounding us have solutions at the table and they're starting to implement those. And those are going to create issues for our town because it could redirect the flow into Clinton Harbor, and that is problematic. So we need to go back to the state and say this is something that needs to be addressed, and we need to work with our legislators to make sure it is a priority for us before the next storms start hitting, because we need to have something at the table, a solution that is doable. But we also, within the planning community, within the town, we need to start creating a more robust GIS system in the town hall, and that is a repository for information to look at where the flood potential is in town and where those areas of infrastructure are potentially at risk. So there's a lot of different layers in it. So it's addressed at the local level, addressed at the regional level, and addressing at the state level. And these are all things that need to happen within town hall. And you really need leadership to be bringing these things forward. And that's the only way we're going to be able to resolve some of the issues for the next generations as well.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, would you like a rebuttal?
Yes, I mean, I think clearly the things that our neighbors do that impinge on us really mean that we have to be constantly vigilant. I mean, there's no substitute for vigilance. And I know that we have some coastal resilience groups in town that are looking at this, and we've got to empower those groups, perhaps make them official, create some commissions perhaps. But we've got to empower the people of Clinton and those who understand the threat to coastal resilience, to give them the authority to speak on our behalf and to speak authoritatively.
Thank you. And Mrs. Goupil?
Right now, we really are in a deficit for information, and we don't have any professionalism at the table to be dealing with this. Unfortunately, last year there was a grant available for us to be able to access those professionals to come up with some plans for on the local level. So looking forward, we're going to have to access some of the grant potential again. This is something I think that's going to be very difficult for the town to be budgeting. It's not something that can be done on a local level with residents. We need professionals at the table. And again, this goes back to the regional planning agency. We do pay fees to the regional planning agency, and they can certainly provide some services there. And then also going back to the state level, starting to have that conversation of things that can be done for our community that won't affect our surrounding neighborhood towns.
Thank you, Mrs. Goupil. In 2015, the Board of Selectmen unanimously approved a resolution to meet 100% of community-wide electricity consumption with renewable resources by the year 2025, and to meet the equivalent of 100% of economy-wide energy consumption, such as electricity, heating, transportation, with renewable energy resources by 2030. The current Board of Selectmen has not addressed the issue to our knowledge. Do you have plans to address the town's energy consumption? And this question goes to Ms. Goupil.
Absolutely. I fully believe that the Energy Committee is doing a wonderful job in making Clinton the first on the map within Connecticut, to address sustainability with a goal of 2030. I think it's something that is feasible. We're looking currently at sites around town, such as the landfill in Stanley Bostitch, for potential solar farms. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and going out to an RFP process, which is a request for proposal from other developers looking at solar farms. So that is something we can do. There's tax credits on the market that will help support the town. So this is a win-win for the town if we can get that type of development to take place in the town. The Energy Committee has also been working very closely with the municipal buildings to make sure that they can find cost-saving measures, specifically light bulbs, low-hanging fruit, all the way up to putting solar and addressing some of the heating sources in town and windows. There's a lot of credits, like I said, available to us that we can go into the buildings and do these at very low cost to the town. At this point, there's also opportunities within Clinton, which the Energy Committee has been working on, and bringing the home energy audits to residents. So if you're on a lower income scale, you have the opportunity to, some of these programs are free, and they'll come in and they'll caulk your windows and they'll do a home energy audit and really tighten up your whole house, but they'll replace your light bulbs, and sometimes, in some instances, they'll replace out-of-dated appliances as well. So there's different levels to the program that the Energy Committee's been working on, and I think they've done a tremendous job. They put the charging station at Town Hall for electric cars, and I'd love to see them expand into other areas of the town, and I'd love to see us remain on the map, but also advertise that. I think is a really big thing that's going to attract millennials to their town. It's a very attractive idea, and it's a sustainable idea, which is important for us moving forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Goupil. Mr. Carr?
Well, this is one that I think we agree on. There's no real difference. There's no light between us on this. Paul Goupil, who I see out in the audience, I don't see Aiden. These two guys have done, Aiden down here someplace? But these guys have really done a great job. They've taken it from 0 to 120 miles an hour in 60 seconds. I mean, it's really been impressive. John Husani's here also has done a lot of work with the businesses to try to get them to adopt energy saving lighting. But this is one of those things that we all have a big stake in renewable energy. I think the planet has certainly improved because of it. But if we can do it in ways that save us money and that reduce the overhead, in the end, that's a win all the way around. So, I think Christine and I would not have much of a difference on this one.
Thank you. Would you like a rebuttal?
I think, other than the grants that are available to us, I think it's like I said, it's really important for us to consider this as a marketing opportunity for millennials and attracting them to the town to really create a different view of what Clinton is. And there's other opportunities such as the Greenway and making it a bikeable community so that people are finding other transportation methods to get to locations throughout town and or all the way to New Haven. That is the potential right now, and we shouldn't disregard it. And it is the future, with the direction that we're going.
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
once again, I couldn't say it better. I think we've got a lot of opportunity in this area, and we ought to seize it.
Thank you.
And now for the final question. A state law passed in 1989 with the intent of reversing housing discrimination requires that 10% of a town's total housing stock be affordable to families earning, in most cases, $64,000 a year or less. In addition to this, affordable housing restricted to senior citizens does not count the same way that other income-restricted housing does. Where is Clinton now regarding its housing stock? Where should it be? And what do you recommend moving forward? This is directed to Mr. Carr.
Well, affordable housing is one of those issues that can be controversial because there are people who feel that it will attract more lower income. I mean, it's very easy to grow poverty. It's very hard to grow prosperity. And there's always that fear that by supplying a great deal of additional affordable housing, you're going to create more poverty. The poverty in Clinton has gone from 2.6 to 9%, dropped back down to about 8.6% in 2015, I believe. But it is what we do need, and clearly we need, because there's a very long waiting list, but we do need elderly housing in this town. People who are from Clinton, who've lived in Clinton sometimes for decades, and who need some place where they can live that's more affordable than they can afford now. In some cases, because their taxes have gone through the roof and they can't afford their homes anymore. And that sometimes is sort of the Democratic playbook. They tax you out of your home and then they give you affordable housing. But the thing that we do need to do is that there are people who are living in Clinton in certain circumstances in sub-quality housing, and if we could move those people up without refilling some of the places. I mean, think about the places across from McDonald's. If we could move the people in those places into something more livable and close those, that would be real progress. And I don't think those places across from McDonald's count as affordable housing. They don't do anything for us. The other thing to recognize is that for someone to qualify for affordable housing, they have to have an income of less than so much, but of at least so much. So there's a very narrow band that affordable housing can provide. The other thing is the state provides all kinds of grants and tax credits to build these things, and they can be a magnet for certain kinds of corruption, where people are making obscene amounts of money on what should be basically philanthropic 501c3 kinds of developments. So as I've said to Christine before on this topic, I'm all about doing well by doing good, but sometimes it's a little too well. I also think we need to think about affordable housing as a regional solution, so that Madison and Westbrook and Old Saybrook, that we're all increasing affordable housing at similar rates, so that Clinton doesn't become the place where all the affordable housing ends up being.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mrs. Goupil?
So affordable housing is something that's actually very near and dear to my heart. The current situation in town, so we're looking at a poverty rate around 8.9% right now. And so that means there's people who have a really difficult time subsisting on their incomes and also affording their rent and or mortgage payments. And this goes along with seniors all the way up and down our demographics. So it was in 2016 I started a housing coalition after numerous opportunities at the state level at conferences as a panelist, answering questions for people saying, how are you moving forward policy in town to accommodate for affordable housing? And I kept saying, well, it really takes civic organizations because there is no structure within town. And I kept saying this, and finally a bell went off and said, I am going to be it. So since then, we've been addressing on the local level everything from people coming in and not being able to pay their rent or being evicted very recently and trying to find housing for them, but also looking at our historic properties in town, and that's an opportunity where we can rehab them, creating revolving funds so that you could rehab them, utilize them, and purchase additional historic properties and keep spending the money. And that benefits the sense of place within Clinton. we are a historic community and we need to support that. But affordable housing really does touch every demographic in town if you're not making more than 80% of the median income, so $64,000. These are your police department, these are your teachers, so it runs the gamut. And these are the people in your community that work in your businesses. You want them to be able to stay in the community. You want them to be able to stay in the school system so they have a supportive structure. So you have a lot of areas in town where people are struggling, such as the manufactured mobile home parks or the trailer parks, as some people call them. It actually is very expensive for these people to be living in those areas. You wouldn't believe it, but then it's also very difficult for them to maintain their properties. They're just not the type of property that you can rehab very easily. So we need to address it at a local level, but also at our local government level. That has not been addressed whatsoever. And I would strongly urge moving forward on the structure of a Board of Selectmen as the First Selectman, making sure that we form a housing partnership, which is the structure the town should have. And they would be working with the social services, they would be working with the police department and the fire department to address what's going on in town. There's a lot of homes that are a real danger to people, but they're living in them because they have no other opportunity, and they're afraid to go to what we have as our Fair Rent Commission, because if they complain, they might get evicted and then they really have nowhere else to live. And the surrounding towns, it doesn't get any cheaper moving to the surrounding towns. So I absolutely very supportive of affordable housing, and there's a lot of structures within the government structure of creating affordable housing that is appropriate in the appropriate location with transit-oriented development so that they can access public transportation if they can't afford a car. But also you can also determine what it's going to look like as well. There are design standards applied to them.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, would you like a rebuttal?
Well, you know, it's a myth that police and teachers, I mean, there are very few that make less than $64,000, that this would somehow, you know, keep them in the community. There are people in the community that do make those low incomes, and who are a real asset to the town, and who we should try to accommodate as much as we can. So, you know, I'm in favor of that, particularly if we can upgrade the living standards and the living styles of those people. But we have to close some things. In other words, some of the bad places that people live. If all we do is move these people into new facilities, and those bad facilities continue to exist, and we move more people into those bad facilities, I'm not sure what we've accomplished. And I haven't heard a solution to that. I mean, I think that's something that we've got to think about, is, you know, how do we condemn some of the bad things and improve people's living conditions?
Mrs. Goupil, a rebuttal?
Well, that specifically, if you're going to deal with some of the issues of locations in town that should be condemned, that's working with your land use office, your building inspectors, and that needs to be stepped up. There are some real issues in town, and the fire department certainly knows about it, the police department certainly knows about it. It needs to be dealt with before somebody does get in a situation where they're injured or dies. There is a structure there, it just needs to get a little nudge to actually take care of it. At the end of the day, there are things you can do to relocate some of these people. So if you have a manufactured mobile home park, you can create a home association for these people, and they can work together to find a better location in town to relocate them. Some of our manufactured mobile home parks are in areas of inundation, and they also have septic issues. DEEP is mandated that they are resolved. So this could be some opportunity within the state to work with different agencies to find a better location for them in town and potentially close some of them. And also,
Thank you both for your answers tonight. In reverse order of the introduction, we will now offer closing statements for the candidates at 3 minutes each. The first going to Mr. Carr.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've learned a lot to digest in tonight's debate. I've had a lot to digest tonight from tonight's debate. But regardless of which of us you think did a better job tonight, the one clear winner is the Morgan Political Club, who I think you'll agree did an extraordinary job. In 2 weeks, you will have to decide which of us will lead Clinton as your first selectman for the next 2 years. For at least 8 years, I've been warning you and the boards of education, selectmen, and finance about the fallacy of conducting business as usual as Clinton's fortunes have declined. Some of you have found these warnings harsh. Sometimes you found them offensive. That was never my intent. But those who accuse me of fear-mongering learned when they opened their tax bills this summer that my predictions were on the mark. Now Moody's bond service just put Clinton on the negative outlook list. The deterioration has accelerated precipitously in the last 6 months due to cuts in state aid, thanks to the Democrat governor's executive order 58. The misery that this inflicted on families, seniors, and small business is despicable, but it doesn't have to be. With careful, common sense management, we can change the course, and the best days for Clinton should be ahead of us. We must control spending. The crisis is a legitimate reason to restructure, right-size, renegotiate, and regionalize. With a competitive mill rate and an empowered and funded Economic Development Commission that is actively targeting prospective businesses that complement existing businesses, we can reverse the vicious cycle and the secular economic decline. We will fill storefronts that add to the grand list, that provide jobs, and make Clinton a more convenient place for its citizens. There are many towns that have been in much more difficult straits and have miraculously turned themselves around. Clinton can and must too. What the mind can imagine, man can achieve. What you can't imagine, what you can't say, you can't do. I am a little engine that could. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And in 2 years, I'd like to come back here and say, I knew I could, I knew I could. There's a path out of this mess. It is the path less traveled. I'm inviting you to take it with me. I'm confident it will make all of the difference. And that is why I'm asking you to vote for me on November 7th. Clinton's best years are yet to come. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mrs. Goupil?
Thank you for coming tonight. I'd like to leave you with a few final thoughts. When we people find that government is listening with genuine interest, they become engaged. When a positive political environment encourages public participation in our electoral process, it creates a sense of ownership. When transparency is brought back to governing, people feel their voice and their vote matters. I will always stand up for the values of our town by building consensus. This will not be based on partisanship or special interests, by representing all of our citizens' voices regardless of party. This is the sound of one person talking is not a conversation. True conversations are the only way we're going to bring about change. What's wonderful about Clinton is that our children will grow up understanding local government works, and it directly affects our lives. Our parents, our teachers, and our community volunteers demonstrate this lesson every day, and I thank them for it. I look forward to the next generation taking an active role in our government. When I become First Selectman with Tim Guerra and Jack Sherwin, the Board of Selectmen, we will devote our energy to building economic sustainability, upholding education excellence, taking care of our seniors, fixing our infrastructure, and preserving our fragile coastal environment and our community character. We will do everything we can to make Clinton a place people are proud to call home, because it really is the jewel of the shoreline. Thank you.
This now concludes the 2017 First Selectmen's debate. We would like to sincerely thank our candidates for attending and debating the issues at this critical point in our town's future. We would also like to thank our audience for coming out to our debate on this rainy evening.
As we mentioned earlier, candidates will be in the lobby outside of the auditorium if you wish to speak with them. Thank you guys all for attending tonight.
Aí,